And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues for questions, but I'm going to echo what Commissioner Czarny said. Joe Barry, thank you very, very much. All righty, Councilor Driscoll.
Thank you all very much for the presentation. I appreciate all of your work, and Legislator Ryan for pushing on for this for so long. All of you. I was curious, my understanding, my first thought as fiduciary agents is regarding costs around an effort like this. Was it my understanding that Austin was mostly voluntary, pro bono, and what would costs look like if we were to pursue this initiative?
Yes, the Austin ordinance, the commissioners, in fact, it's right in the ordinance, they do not get any monetary reimbursements for serving on the commission. There are some minor, reimbursements for expenses, and the staff of a commission would be decided in your budget lines. They can hire staff, but I don't know what they've done in Austin, but I believe it was minor. It's a very short window of time that they have to look at this. So we're not talking, any more costs that would be on the books than the city would already spend in a redistricting process with city personnel. So, I think, city personnel could serve as support staff, the council staff could serve as support staff. But if they needed to hire, massive redistricting, if you were doing something different, like changing from, 5 to 10 or something like that, then the city would have to hire staff as well. So I don't see it as being anything more than what you normally would spend in redistricting.
Yeah, I was going to say, you may, in your own process, want to have a consultant, right, who is a map drawer, who has been through the process before and aware of the legal requirements at the federal level. And, so that would be the expense that you would want for your own process would be available to the commission. So I wouldn't anticipate that you would have extraordinary expenses over and above what you would normally do, whatever the cost of the hearings are, that you would invite the public to as part of your process. So it should not be a significant additional expense.
Great, thank you.
You mentioned Austin going from an at-large model to district model. Do maybe the outsider and the insiders locally, do you just envision us having the independent authority just redraw the lines for the 5 districts, or do you imagine larger changes than that?
And Sue, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what happened there in Austin is they went from an all at-large model to an all-district model. Here in Syracuse, we already have a hybrid model where we have 4 at-larges and 5 districts. The independent commission would not have authority to change that. Only the council would have authority to change that through a charter change. The independent commission, you would want to put into your language of your ordinance the ability for them to adapt if you did change that. And I believe, there is that ability to do that in there. So when you're talking about the Austin model, they went from an all at-large to a district, which necessary. So they were drawing their districts for the first time in 2012. That would not be the case here in Syracuse, and that's why the ordinance that you would draw would be germane to the city of Syracuse. So I would imagine, unless this charter would be envisioning that, this charter change would be envisioning that the the basic structure of 4 and 5, 4 at-larges and 5 districts would stay in place. But at a later time, the council could change that if the council always had that ability to change that. And then if you changed it before the census was up in 2021, then the independent commission could then draw different lines if you were adding or eliminating numbers of district councils.
From a common cause point of view, we don't really have a position. We're not suggesting that you should go to an all-district model. That is really part of the decision that Syracuse makes for itself.
I got it.
I can share.
Yeah, you can share.
Right. First, to the commissioner's point, naturally there were concerns in regards to council losing power. I'm certainly a person who have expressed concerns about the ways in which the legislature has lost power in the past that I still don't think is really recognized by the people or even people in elected office. But I will say this, relative to this effort, I think it provides a lot of great opportunities. One is the civic learning opportunity for constituents involved. There are many of us who, believe that we're aware of how government works, but there's some who often find out that when you encounter people, you find out that things work quite differently from what was assumed. And so this is a great opportunity in that respect. To the point mentioned, the opportunity to eliminate partisanship is very important. And for the many who hear the term gerrymandering and not under the assumption that it's not known, but at the crux of it, it implies a district being drawn in favor of one specific party in comparison to another. And that has happened here, with all due respect, on our county level in our last redistricting. And so the opportunity to prevent that kind of partisanship, I think, is very important. Also, this is really a real returning of the power back to the people. When you have citizens involved in the process, learning the process, making decisions about how the districts are drawn, I think the importance of that, and to the point made earlier about our consistent effort of reestablishing trust in government and the people, I think that goes without saying. I do have one question relative to the existing legislation, and this is specific to not less than 17, no more than 23, which is that difference has always been a concern of mine even before now, especially in a district council race. You're talking about a difference of 6%. And so I can make assumptions about why that is, but I want to hear why the margin is so wide. And just to provide some perspective, standard rule, an election district is approximately 2,000 people. So 6%, you're talking about a 600-person difference. 600 people can win an election in a district council. So when you talk about fairness and balance, I think you have to question whether it's in fact fair and balanced. So I wonder why the margin's so wide.
So that does go to what you need to do in order to accurately reflect communities of interest. The legal standard that's established by case law is districts which are plus or minus 5%. A 10% deviation will stand.
Gotcha.
In a voting rights case. We at Common Cause actually have recommended a 3% plus or minus deviation to give map drawers enough ability to be sure that the communities are accurately represented, but that they are as equivalent, the districts are as equivalent in size as they can be, while still not cutting up communities artificially, right? So if you have a very strict standard, like, as you do for the congressional districts, which are much, much larger, plus or minus one voter, you get some very strange cuts in your district, where your district boundary lies. If you do that with a smaller district, then you are very artificially cutting communities. And so you're balancing the desire to keep a community together with the need to have fairly equivalent districts, but not, such a stringent standard that you're hamstrung.
And you do want some deviation in there, because then the council or the commission will be able to make determinations on future population growth. We may know that the Inner Harbor is being developed, and so the second district is going to grow over the next 10 years. And having some deviation in there would allow for that. Or we may know that, a certain highway may be coming down, and, further developments might happen based on that. So these are things that will allow the commission to take future planning into account.
So the specific language that we recommend in the charter revision is rather than each district shall be equal in population, it's really each council district shall have reasonably equal populations, except where deviation is required to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act or allowable by law. So, right now, what's suggested in what has been very expertly drafted, we think is a little too tight. It will really constrain your map drawers artificially in a way that doesn't serve the interests of the communities.
So what's actually presented is different from what we have here.
No, what I'm
Reasonably is-
suggesting is, I'm
Okay.
suggesting a change
Got you.
to what you have there.
Yeah,
And the
and-
language I quoted is actually directly out of the Austin statute.
Yeah.
I think, Counselor, the 17 to 23, and Joe, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that's referencing the old language in the charter, and the new language that is in the draft that may be changed before it's submitted to the council doesn't have a deviation in there at all, and we're suggesting a deviation of about 3%.
Okay, that's what and what I assumed in terms of one of the reasons for why some deviation is needed made sense. Otherwise, you end up with more eagles and peninsulas. So I saw that to be one of the reasons. And relative to choosing the appropriate map, you've answered that question as well. I would think that the one with the smaller amount of deviation would be considered.
A good map drawer is always trying to do that, but again, cognizant of you don't want to artificially cut out 5 blocks of a community that really belongs together.
Right. Thank you.
She's done already. Okay, and we're going to go right next to me, Councilor Thompson.
Madam President, I just jotted a couple of things down, nothing, what my concern is more, and I sent Dustin a thing earlier, more about process, I think, than not process to getting this onto the voting, but process and how the selection occurs, how the input is. I know we're gonna look to give public hearings and all this, and I've been to all these for lots of years. Does it stimulate people to get out? That's the thing. Can we stimulate people to get out, or do we end up flat, where we don't, and then do we fall on our face? I don't want to see that happen. So that's one of the concerns that I've had. I have watched groups in all different endeavors, and they fall on their face because they try and get people to actively show up. That's just a statement. But I had two questions, I think. One is, you showed Austin's change in 2014, I think you said. And then you showed the 2016, 2014 data. What happened in 2018? Did you have that data? You said in 14 it increased because they went to the new districting.
Right.
So,
I don't, but I can find that out easily.
okay, yep. And
And
the oth-
2018 was a pretty high turnout race everywhere.
Yeah.
Across the country,
So
for
we would
factors that may have nothing to do with redistricting, right? Because you didn't have new districts to excite people, but you had other things that people cared about.
Sure, absolutely. Let's see, the other one is, I'm all for the people drawing and putting it together, but I would need to explore, or hear why when it was done, it wouldn't come back to the council. So the council, that would take 5 votes to throw it out. So, and that probably wouldn't happen. But I would just like to hear the justification behind that, And do other models use that? Where that comes back?
Other models use it, but we don't call them independent redistricting models for that reason. And New York City, I believe, has a version of that. And the problem with that model is that if we're looking towards the future, and we're looking towards future councils, we don't want a council that could reject what the people have put together and not accept it. And while while I understand the wish on this, I believe that it's more important to give the final say to the people, and that's my personal opinion. But I believe if we have a truly independent redistricting commission, then we take out the charge that the leaders are selecting their representatives as opposed to the representatives selecting their leaders. And once we can get that out of the way, then we can engage people in a civic process, and their voice really can matter because they have selected which communities should be together and be represented, and then those communities can select their representative. And if you have a break where the council could intercede, then you have the tuggings of temptations of incumbency and self-interest that is there in anybody. I think if you had an independent commission, then that independent commission would not be able to take into account, in fact, it would be barred from taking into account incumbency and partisanship and, in the past in predicting the future. So that is why I'm for independent redistricting, and that's why I've tried to advocate for this process. And it took me a long time to get to that point as well. 20 years ago, I don't think I was there, but now it just, when I've seen it enacted in other communities, Austin, California, on the congressional level, in Arizona and other places, it's really worked very well for those communities, and they've been engaged in their process more.
Nothing in life is certain, and we can't guarantee that the residents of Syracuse will react the way we have seen the residents of other municipalities respond to the opportunity to draw their own maps. I personally was stunned with the outpouring of Californians when the new redistricting commission was set up. California set up a website to do a preliminary cut of people who were interested in being on the commission. And we really thought at the time, those of us who were involved in redistricting, we're going to do really well if as many as 5,000 or 6,000 people from across the state apply. So when 30,000 Californians filled out the preliminary questionnaire, we were really stunned. Austin is not a large city, but 500 people wanted to be on the commission. And personally, for me, one of the most successful workshops I ever ran was a workshop in a community in New York City, a very diverse community where we had to translate into 2 different languages to have our workshop, and it was a mapping workshop of helping the communities identify how their community should be reflected on a map. When you ask people these questions, where do you shop? Where do you live? Where do you worship? Where do you go to school? They want to tell you. And I learned things about that community. It was really fascinating that I, as a map drawer, was looking at and said, well, there's a big shopping area here. Should that be included? And they said, no, none of us go there. The bus lines don't work well for that. So we don't ever shop there. So that shouldn't be part of our district. The community tells you they know what is important to them, and they're very eager, we found, to actually visualize it and share that with you. So I think, if Syracuse responds the way other communities do, it will be a really vigorous and interesting process for everybody.
Yeah, I just want to say the other thing too, specific to not just City of Syracuse, County of Onondaga, Austin, Texas, California. There are multiple cases, court cases that have gone beyond just Supreme Court, State Supreme Court, Appellate Court in, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there's some North Carolina, Virginia, Wisconsin, just to name a few. I think all across, and it's not specific to one party, there's been challenges to both parties who've drawn both districts. I think as a whole, across this country, I think people are beginning to push back on the notion of gerrymandering. And I think it's just, it doesn't serve us well. The very, Councilor Bay, you know, the definition, by definition, that one group draws a district that isn't representative of that community for the sole purpose of benefiting those people in power that are drawing the district. It's not right. It's not. And I think all across the country, the dynamic has changed. And I think that what we're trying to do here in the city and the county is, I think we're on the right track. So I just wanted to say that. It's important to know also what's going on across the country.
And I would just comment that it may not take me 20 years because I'm there now. I agree with this. I'm just asking the question because somebody's going to ask that question. Why isn't this, why don't you guys do? Because as Councilor Bay said, I mean, we have lost a lot of our legislative powers over the years and we allow them to go. This is possibly a very good one to let go. But, so I'm just bringing it up.
It's a fair question, and it's not one that won't be asked throughout the entire process. So thank you for the question, because it was, that is the kind of stuff that we're all going to have to answer as this process goes forward.
That's all right. Get noisy, Mike.
Sorry about that. So first, I want to thank President Hudson for bringing up this initiative. I think that when elected officials are able to not use their power for political means and able to give some of that power to people, it's inspiring to people in terms of inspired by democracy, and we need a lot of inspiration based on what's going on in the country right now. So I think that this is, it's just a very positive development, I think. So I just want to thank President Hudson for that. One thing I want to touch upon, so where I live, my district counselor is Councilor Driscoll, and the person directly across the street from me is district counselor is Councilor Allen, and that's stupid, right? I mean, there's no other way to say it. So, and I think from a community standpoint, the fact that a street like that, first of all, if the trash doesn't get picked up, the fact that the street has to call two different people doesn't make sense. It's inefficient. It doesn't give them a direct line of who people should be talking to. But I also think from a counselor standpoint, district counselors are only one person and they can't be everywhere all the time, and there's always a million different neighborhood meetings. And when you're cutting up different neighborhoods like that and forcing everyone to go all around the city, it just makes it harder for you to represent the community that you really should be representing, right? So I think that it's something, obviously by definition, you can't put a rating on qualitative how well a counselor is doing, but my suspicion is that if we did a better job of creating these districts, the counselors would just do a better job because they would have more time to focus on one neighborhood or a group of neighborhoods that makes sense. So it's a long way of saying I support this.
And yeah, unfortunately, when we're drawing district lines or election district lines or council lines, you have to go down a street in the middle of the street. So there are going to be at least, a whole bunch of streets that have that happen. But what the independent commission can do is be more strategic in which streets they go down, and what, instead of going down a neighborhood street, maybe they go down a business thoroughfare, and then they're keeping more communities together. While and they can take that into account and specialize in while you, the council, is focusing on running a very diverse and very challenging city, they can focus on this mapping issue for 6 months and come up with the best maps possible.
And I would say not only that too, but if someone were to, the boundaries are always going to have to be somewhere, and they're always going to have to exist. But at least this way, if someone asks, well, why does the district look like this? You can say, nonpartisan experts decided it, not, well, it was good politics, so this is where we cut the line. So I think that also helps people, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just going to echo what Councilor Green said, because it was one of my, not so much of a concern, but just a comment. As a district counselor, and especially with the 4th district is very, very diverse. And this would be very helpful. It would help me personally to be able to do my job more efficiently. But there are so many different needs in every area of the 4th district. So with this process, I think this would make it a lot easier, but more so efficient for the district counselors to be able to make sure that they can kind of monitor their areas better. for me, example, I have some of Westcott, I have downtown, I have Southside, I have Southwest, and it's all one district, but those are all for totally different areas, totally different issues, and different challenges. So this would make it a lot better, especially for the district counselors. And as far as I understood what you were saying, but I feel like if it did come back to the council for a vote, it's kind of an illusion that we gave people the power. Because it's just like, here, you have the power to draw this, but you got to come back and bring it to us. And that can kind of show a lot of bias. So if I'm in the 4th district and I don't like the way they drew my lines, I'm not voting for it. You know what I mean? So I don't think we should do it that way. But I do understand why you mentioned it.
And I think, with Councilor Thompson playing devil's advocate, it just really points out that how unique of a situation this can be in Syracuse. And that, that we would be the only city on the Northeast that has done this and been this progressive and this egalitarian in giving this power back to the citizenry. And that's why I'm excited by it, because I think not only, is it good for the citizenry, but it's going to put Syracuse on the map.
For something good.
For something good.
Yeah.
Right. Let's face it, we have a poverty problem inside the city of Syracuse. That poverty problem has gotten worse over the last 20 years, but we didn't draw maps to help the citizens during those 20 years, that to be able to give them more say to the people. And, poverty drives population, and it drives people out of the city, it drives people to different portions of the city. And we don't have I'm sure when the census comes out, we're going to have maps that are really out of balance. They're already out of balance when it comes to voter registration. And we know the population will exploit that because people that are in poverty tend to be not enrolled as voter registration. So the places that are going to have even farther, disparate tracts of population in these districts. And going back to those people, the citizenry, and asking them to say which neighborhoods belong together, I think that's just going to be a benefit for the council.
All righty, so we're going to wind down, but I just want to ask the question, and maybe I should have done this before I came here, because I don't know, maybe James, you may have to help me. Do we know, since the last redistricting, what the influx, because I know we've had a ton of refugees come in. Do we know what the influx is of different folks coming into our city?
So,
Go ahead.
the American Community Survey does track that sort of thing. I mean, I've seen some maps that have to do with the expansion of low-income neighborhoods. I know that there are definitely those figures are available. I just don't happen to have them, at my fingertips. But yes,
And I'm sure they all came in under over the 20-year mark.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yes, no
And
question.
There's no doubt that the influx of new Americans on the north side has radically changed what used to be Old Italy. We have a huge Vietnamese population and Burmese population up there. We have, large settlements of young professionals in the old factories as those apartments have been created on the, on the west side. I don't know how much the population has shifted, but I do know it has, and I do know that we're going to see that over the last 20 years, new communities have been created, and they may be better to be grouped together so they can get better representation. And I think we're going to see that when the census comes out.
And I know working with Hope, and OSHA's back there, maybe she can help me out here, but I know working with Hope that we found out that we have a big, what the population, we have a huge population from the Caribbean over on the south side.
Right.
Yep. So there's a
right.
huge population there.
Yeah.
So we're shifting, and we need to figure out where the shift is and how to pull it together. So, anything else?
So, Madam President, I do have, some specific language suggestions, as I had mentioned, and is that something we should just discuss on the record, or something to share with you separately?
Well,
Mayor, you might as well.
go for it.
Okay, so, I don't have the
It's in here.
language directly in front of me, but I do have specific references. One of the things that I had mentioned in my presentation was the need to have a specific date rather than saying 6 months after. So whether that's June 1 or July 1 of the year that ends in 1 or the year that ends in 2, depending on when you want your cycle to be. Knowing that the census is the year that ends in 0. The data usually comes down mid-year, the year that ends in 1, right? So then you figure out when do you want to have your commission impaneled. New York City does it very late, all right? They draw their maps quite late in the process, after just about every other place does. I don't know why, but that happened to fit the calendar for New York City's municipal election. So you want to think about where do your municipal elections fall. The easiest thing is to say June 1 or July 1 of the year that ends in 1. And then you've got your commission set up, and whenever the data comes down, you're able to handle it. Or, within no later than September 1 of the year that ends in 1, because that gives people time to actually work with the data. So that's one suggestion. And then the other suggestion is the language that I read earlier about the size of the districts being reasonably equivalent rather than having them be a strict equivalency.
I have nothing further to say. Just thank you very much for discussing this, being open to discussing it, and thinking about putting this forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing and hearing.